Hey everyone, FPS Chasley here. I'm here with my friend Tamburello, Ben.
Hey,
How's it going? And we are here to discuss the Trident Deception, which I have to say, first off, just right away, very good book. At first, I did not think. I don't think it started off very well. Ben can testify to this. We were talking about it as we were reading it. Um, I was not really thinking too highly of it at first, but once he gets into his niche, which is writing about submarines, and that is Rick Campbell, the author, it really blows up and becomes amazing. And it was one of the most tense books I've read in a while.
I think I should start off by telling everybody how I found the book. My dad came from Detroit, and he had this book. And obviously, when you see a submarine on a book, you're like, "Oh wow!" And just thumbing through the book, I was like, "Oh my god!" I wasn't really reading. You know how you just scan a book, and just reading, just thumbing through it. It was just chock full of stuff that we see in our game. Just on the first impression, I was like, "I got to get this book." And I tried to bribe my dad, hey, turn your head, so I can take your book, and would not give that book up for anything. And it wasn't until after he went back home, and uh, a few weeks went by. I was like, "Hey, that book. What was the name of that book?" And he was like, "Oh my gosh, that was such a fantastic book." And from then on, I told Chasley about it, and so right away, I'm hoping that you know it has as much impact with everybody here as it did with my dad. And with Chasley's initial reaction, like, this isn't really what I'm thinking it was going to be. I kind of it ruined my swerve a little bit. But I there were several days where I came home from work and went straight reading the book, and I think there was like 3 or 4 days where no one ever heard of me because I was just so engrossed with the book.
Yeah, I'm usually used to. Ben and I usually our schedules don't line up during the week, so we normally exchange messages offline. And for like a whole week, he was pretty much running silent. I was like, "Dude, where are you at?" It's like, "Dude, I can't stop reading this book." I was like, "Oh, I should probably get back into this then."
For those of you who are still reading it or thinking about reading it, well, for those of you who are still reading it, continue on. And those of you who are even thinking about buying a good novel or a good submarine thriller, this is the book for you. Trident Deception. And he's got a few other ones out too that maybe we'll get to later down the road. But for starters, this is the book to do right here.
I would like to say, with the full weight of my status on YouTube and what you think of me, if you've started the book or have not read it and are watching this right now, I would highly recommend you stop watching right now, because this is a book that you want to experience page by page. You do not want someone to tell you about this. It is a
Yeah,
very, it's
we just had
very,
someone in here who was reading the book that we basically told to leave.
yeah, it's like, get out of here, man. We don't want you. love you,
And
Kyle.
oh yeah, Kyle, sorry, buddy, but one of the passages that really got me is is on page 72, about halfway down. It goes, as grueling as it was to run and and rerun the endless drills, Tom knew and appreciated the reason why. The single most important rule for a submarine was to make the number of surfaces equal to the number of dives. When I read that, that really struck me because I never had thought about it like that. That
Yeah,
you want the number of surfaces to equal the number of dives for sure. It could not be more succinct than that being on a submarine. I thought that was great.
yeah, that's a great passage. I'm sure it's some saying somewhere, but yeah, it's also something that I'd never really thought about. It's like, yeah, that's true. You want the number of dives to equal the number of surfaces, or vice versa.
I actually had to sit there and contemplate that for a bit. You know, being as I knew this is one of the things that we were required to do it for the book club was to find some passages. I think that really sums up, the book for one, and for what we do here, with Chasley, every week. You know, this book paralleled the game so much, and I thought that was, I thought that was a testimony to the game and the book itself.
for sure. And this kind of has like a dark. It almost has like a dark connotation slash foreshadow of the book. This passage here in this paragraph, because right after that, the next sentence in that, or the next sentence in that paragraph says, everything they did throughout the days, weeks, and months underway was focused on ensuring they could accomplish their mission and still be alive to surface the submarine and return home. And they end up doing that, but through the course of the book, they go through a lot of shit to get there, and they do everything they set out to do, which wasn't a good thing to do because of the deception of the book.
One interesting point that I read in the prologue, or his little in the back here, is that he made great lengths to unclassify the book. Obviously, there's not any classified information in the book, but when you read it, it sounds like you're right there. It doesn't
Yeah,
sound like he sanitized anything. There's chock full of information, and I thought really good tactics. I was like, oh, I can't wait to try that in the game. And yeah,
for
but
sure.
he went through great lengths to sanitize this book, so no real tactics and secrets were divulged. And I thought that a testament again to how good this book, well written, it is.
Yeah. So I was originally envisioning this to have more people and kind of passages just bouncing around basically, but I think we may try and go for more of a chronological progression through the book here with just the two of us. So
Okay.
I'm going to go ahead and go to one of my passages that I found that was actually like a pretty good foreshadow passage. Okay, so this is when Wilson is talking to Commander Casey.
You got a
And
page?
yes, the page is 26. It's
Oh
about halfway
wow,
down.
get far.
So this is when, unbeknownst to them, the LA is drilling against the Ohio here, and they don't know at this point that the sonars have been compromised with the bug. Um, so they're thinking that this is a valuable lesson and that he's never had to fail like all of his prospective officers before, whereas they simply just could not find the Ohio. So Commander Casey, what's the most important lesson you learned this week? Casey looked up, and Wilson knew from the look in the young commander's eyes that he had learned his lesson. Casey said, "Don't be too cocky." And I think this has implications for later in the book, because I don't think Wilson necessarily gets cocky, but it's just it's I think it sets the good tone for the book, and that they through all the crazy crap they went through, they weren't really acting cocky at all. They were pretty much doing just what they were instructed and trained to do.
That was so early. It's like as I'm sitting here, it's like I got to read this book again. In interest of total disclosure to everybody, it's been a while since I've completed this book. I think I was the first one to finish it, and that's been probably about a month ago now. So
Yeah.
some of these passages, it's like, oh wow, yeah, that's right. And again, a testament how good this book is. Just him relighting that passage. It was like, oh yeah, wow. I'd almost forgotten about that. Yeah, that was magic, dude.
Yeah, for both of us, it's been a while, so there's going to be a lot of like, oh wait, oh yeah, that's right, kind of going on in this thing here. uh,
Yeah, as he's sitting here talking, I'm starting to read again.
yeah.
Gotta put the book down.
Continuing right from the end of that, don't be cocky. Wilson smiled. That's exactly right, gentlemen. Never underestimate your opponent, which is exactly what you did this week. And that's also an important lesson throughout the book, because you never once hear Wilson underestimate his opponents at all. Like, oh, we got this, or oh, whatever. He treats every single threat as a credible and a fully 100% dangerous threat to his boat's existence, which I think is an important lesson for all of us as we play Dangerous Waters.
And that's one of the aspects that I was keeping in mind while reading the book. And I guess as I read through a lot of submarine, is I use it for my single player and our matches together, and things like that where they say don't underestimate the opponent. It's good reminders, that when you're playing the game, that even if you're going up against something you've gone and shot many a times, don't underestimate your opponent. Very good, very good.
Yes, we are. So when you get down in the weeds in Dangerous Waters, it's everyone has the tendency to start, fighting a paper battle, comparing the numbers on paper. But in all honesty, the technology doesn't make as much of a difference as one would think. It's all on the captain, all on the crew, and how well they work together is what mostly determines, or a good chunk of a fight is determined by that fact. Tom Clancy has a good quote. I'm not sure if it's his originally or if he paraphrases it, but he likes to say that he'd rather have a good crew in a bad boat than a bad crew in a good boat. And that's definitely a very true adage.
Why I always stress, especially with, guys that are coming in and playing this game, is I stress seat time. There's nothing. I mean, you can watch all the videos all in the world, but it's seat time and training. That's basically what seat time is. You're training amongst yourselves, and that's what's going to make your proficiency better. And in this book, they definitely stress the crew. If the crew breaks down, the mission breaks down, and it starts with the captain. And in this book, especially on the Kentucky, there is a very strong captain, and even when there are issues with some of the crew, the job still gets done because the training is there. And
Yep.
that's one thing that, I mean, because to be honest, there are several points in the book that, just from my own military experience, I know that wouldn't happen. You're not going to be in a lone situation, but because of the training of the crew, the mission still got through. I guess I can say that they fired their missiles, right? I mean, I guess
They
we're
did
not
fire
giving
their
any,
missiles, or some
fire
of
their
them at
missiles.
least.
So the mission was completed. Throughout, some of the foibles of the crew, because of the training and because of the leadership. Another passage, going further back, to page 391. Here's the passage right here. Kim, or 390. Kim knew that this mission would be dangerous once they engaged their target. Each with the long range of their heavyweight torpedoes, they could travel over 20 miles before running out of fuel. You had to get close to your opponent to sink the knife in. That meant you could be stabbed in return. Unfortunately, there were no flesh wounds in submarine combat. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. No, there are no flesh wounds in submarine combat.
For sure. If a torp is hitting you, you're pretty much done for, just about. Unless you're the Kentucky and you get hit in the missile shroud.
I kind of live by that now. I pride myself with my evasion technique, and I work on it, meticulously, and I am, that's kind of been my what do they say, modus operandi, now with dealing with threats, is there are no flesh wounds, and when you shoot to kill. So you got another one, Chasley?
Oh yeah, I will be going back to the beginning again. It's on page 76. Malone picked up his next set of cribbage cards, pausing for a moment to savor the unmistakable omen of good luck. He had just been dealt a 29-point hand, his first ever in 20 years of play. The odds of being dealt a 28-point hand were 15,000 to 1, and the even rarer 29-point hand, considered a good luck among submariners, 1 in 250,000. As Malone looked down on his 29 points, he could not but reflect on the hot summer day in Mare Island Naval Shipyard years earlier. His submarine, one of the last to complete overhaul before the historic shipyard. Okay, here, let me skip ahead a few lines here.
Sure.
In 1943, while the U.S. surface fleet slugged its way westward across the Pacific, Executive Officer Dick O'Kane and his captain, Mush Morton, led the submarine Wahoo on her fourth war patrol deep into Japanese-controlled waters in search of enemy ships. In particular, they were looking for the prized merchant ships, the lifeblood of the island nation of Japan. By mid-March, transiting into the Yellow Sea, the crew had nothing to show for the long weeks at sea, morale deteriorating as each day passed. Their spirits lifted on March 18 when Dick O'Kane, playing cribbage with his captain, was dealt a rare 29-point hand. Lady Luck made good on her promise. The Wahoo sank her first merchant ship of the patrol the following day. A scant 2 days later, O'Kane was dealt a 28-point hand, the Wahoo sinking a second merchant ship within the hour. And then, skipping this next paragraph here, Malone played out his 29-point hand, pegging from behind and winning the game. As he leaned back in his chair, the cloud of uncertainty that accompanied the beginning of each patrol as the ship and its new crew members settled into the routine finally lifted. He slowly pushed the cards across the table toward the XL. As for Dick O'Kane and the Wahoo, this would indeed be a lucky patrol for the USS Kentucky Blue Crew. So that's a pretty good foreshadowing of the events to come in this book, that they're going to have luck on their side and end up winning out, quote unquote, winning out based on the bad orders that they were given.
Plowing forth through the book, with that in mind, you're thinking, okay, somehow, some way, this is all going to work itself out. But then when you get further on in the book and realize, hey, wait a minute, they're about to turn the keys.
Yeah, so it provides. So as you're reading, you're like, is it going to turn out for how you want it to turn out, or is it going to turn out for the Ohio? Like, who's going to get the luck and who is going to have their cribbage hand? Who's going to have their 1 in a million cribbage hand?
And that's what I found myself doing, is pleading the book on my own in my head and being pleasantly surprised and amazed that this is not nowhere near where I thought this was heading. Because, okay, the Collins, they're going to figure it out and they're going to get to them. And amongst the mayhem and torpedoes and bombs flying, they're going to get an underwater telephone message to these guys and save the day. And
Yeah.
no.
No, it didn't. That was a particularly powerful moment in the book. I was like, oh my god, they just sunk the Collins. It's a very the book evokes strange feelings in that you're happy for the Ohio because they're doing their job, but you're also like, but they're following bad orders, and it kind of shows the importance of why these orders need all these kinds of safeguards or whatever, because you're going to get a situation where they're going to follow through and they're going to be nearly unstoppable.
And I can't speak to the Navy aspect, but with my Air Force service, I saw the Air Force side of our nuclear triad, and I can attest to the protocols and fail safes and procedures that prevent unauthorized launches. Just what we see in this book. That's why, for me, several points of it where it was somewhat unrealistic, because you're not going to tell someone, hey, go get a cup of coffee and leave me in this critical area by myself so I can sabotage this critical component. That's exactly why they have no loan zones. So yes, I know for the book purposes, that's something, that's in the book, but, people that have been there in the know, that's probably not going to happen like that because of that reason. So, for us with the more technical or with the more detailed knowledge of some of how these things work, we know better than that, but it still plays well in the book, and it definitely, it's plausible, but in this day and age, it's probably just not going to happen. But if, starting from about page 440, that's about, and that's getting pretty deep in the book. You're not going to be able to put it down till you finish it from that point on. I could read from page about 440 on and just continue the whole book. And
yeah, that's scene right around 440 is particularly intense. The confrontation between Christine and her ex-husband.
Yes, and that's and again, I'm glad you brought that up. That's another side aspect of this book. Side story with this Christine character, who is probably the heroine of the book, who at certain points I thought was dead.
Yeah, for sure thought was dead.
And really comes, and especially at the end, really comes back and shows some steel and some grit. And it's I would almost look at Christine's character as the guy in Red October. Who is that? Baldwin's character.
Jack Ryan.
Yeah, I almost look. She's the Jack Ryan of this book, for sure. But yeah, that the scene here on page again on page 556. I don't want to read the whole thing, um, but it tells the story how our government gets back at the Israelis for hatching this whole plan in the beginning. And you just wonder how some of these things can happen if things like this happen in real life. If people are poisoned like this by just taking a drink. I don't know what she gave him, but she poisons him. She poisons, who is that? The defense minister or the
Yeah, it's
intelligence?
Barack was his
Yeah, the
name.
intelligence chief. I don't know if he's their intelligence chief or their defense minister. I'm not really
Yeah, I think
sure.
he was the intelligence chief. But to clarify your comment, the U.S. government got back on the one actor in the Israeli government who staged this whole thing. The rest
How
of
did
the
I say
Israeli,
it?
you said just the I think just the Israeli government in general or the Israelis or
Oh, okay,
something.
okay. Yeah, there were some rogue elements. I guess maybe we should have started by explaining, even though we expect that people are listening to this who've read the book, to explain some of the themes of the book. Uh, the Israeli government hatched a plan where they were going to use a part of our nuclear triad, our submarine launched ballistic missiles, to launch a preemptive attack on Iran. Uh, I want to say because Iran had some missiles. Am I right with that?
Their
They're,
reactor had just or they were their first bomb was about to be completed.
right. So it's ripped out of today's headlines for one, which gave it some real relevance. Um, and like I said, the elements in the Israeli government were able to compromise uh, critical components and hatch this plan where a very elaborate plan where they disabled some of our SSNs, the first line, and then was able to cut the communications to the Ohio class SSBN and send it codes to launch their missiles. Um,
It was a very elaborate plan. Yeah, I mean, like, I don't want to necessarily say you were downplaying it, but they they put a virus in the entirety of the American submarine fleet to render their sonars ineffective against Ohio class submarines, specifically the Kentucky. I believe it was. I think it was just targeted against the Kentucky's tonals.
Can I jump in here for
yeah.
just a
See,
second?
you just got done with this book, obviously. I did a little fade for me. Um, but it was fascinating because at that point with the Los Angeles class, I was still kind of in the fog with it. I think I mentioned to you earlier. I wanted to go back and read that part again because I was still unsure what had happened until I got further on in the book and realized, oh, okay, that's how they didn't find him. I
Yeah,
was
it made
I
no
was
sense when you first read it through. You're like, what?
right. It made no sense how at least how I read it, the Los Angeles never detected it just, and I'm not sure if that was just bad writing or just bad comprehension. But again, it wasn't until further back that I realized, hey, okay, they disabled the sonars to those. Uh, just that's fascinating to me how that can be done.
Yeah, I was thinking about that as I was reading that along. Uh, I guess it would be feasible, but I mean, so I think Neil deGrasse Tyson has a quote on this about like science fiction, and I would consider this science fiction to some extent. Um, it's of course not full. It's a thriller. It's a techno thriller, but I mean, to something like this has never happened. Like the scenarios put forth in the book, so I would consider it science fiction to some extent. So in that vein, I have no problem when they do stuff like that. Like say they just they make it so the sonar can't detect this boat, but the way that you have no issue with it is they don't try and get into extraneous amounts of details to explain how it happened. That's usually when stuff falls on its face. But if they keep it like at like a high global level, they say, oh, they installed like this bug in here that took out the sonar, made it ineffectual against its target. I'm fine with situations like that.
Another aspect I really enjoyed was and at least with Dangerous Waters, most of us who are focused on the submarines, it's the hunter killers. It's really fascinating to get an insight. I guess I should say it like this: an unclassified insight in a boomer. Um, the boredom, the long transit, the moving transit. How they, I don't know if that was real, how they do that, but there's zones of where they set up how it moves. Is that
Yeah,
how I was getting that, Chasley? Did you
I think.
understand that, how that was moving like that?
Yeah, I think so. That has like an area around the boomer where they just. It seems like they keep all friendly submarines out of that area, so it doesn't even get close to the boomer or something. That's how I was interpreting it, as in, like, the submarine that receives the order to not go near the boomer won't know why. They're just told, "Hey, stay to this area that you're going in." They would probably form it progressively like that, in that they would say stick to this area instead of avoid that area. The subtlety and language difference there kind of, it doesn't allow anyone to read into it to be like, hey, just stay in this channel here. But on that same vein, when he was talking about, like, the submarine, like, air traffic control, basically, like how they have like designated areas for all the subs to go through, I thought was very interesting. I'd never heard of anything like that. I would like to. I don't have a passage for this, but I wanted to talk about it. The part where the American head diplomat in Israel gets summoned to the prime minister's office with, was the intelligence minister there in that meeting, where they asked if the Americans could provide bunker busters, and the Americans are like, hell no, we don't want you making a strike against Iran or whatever. And the Iranians did not. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't. The Israelis did not convey to the Americans in that meeting that Iran was close to having a bomb,
No,
as I recall.
I don't
No,
remember
yeah.
that.
So later on in the book, when they do start this plan to shoot the ballistic missiles, you start kind of going like hindsight. Oh, we should have just given them the bunker busters. And it's like, to me, that was just like in a perfect example of like why hindsight is always 20/20, and you can't. It's very unfair in a lot of situations to take future knowledge and apply it back to previous decisions. That was just something I wanted to highlight.
Was it ever expounded on in the book as to why the Israelis decided to use the U.S. nuclear arsenal? Because as far as I know, the Israelis would have been more than capable of doing it with conventional weaponry.
My assumption, well, I'm sure it was kind of explained, but I think it's because the Israelis are right next to Iran in the Middle East. If the world knew that they made a move against Iran like that, who knows what kind of quote unquote Arab coalition could have formed to snuff out Israel. So if the U.S. does it instead, it takes away the fact that Israel was involved, and they kind of would be like, oh, wow, look at that. They decided to strike against the Iranians. We're all safe and sound now.
Oh, okay. So was it the entire Israeli government that was in on it, or was it just the small section who just wanted to get rid of Iran?
It was a very small
Elements.
set, yes. It was all pretty much orchestrated by this head intelligence minister.
Okay.
He got the he okay. So and then so he first presented the intelligence minister with, or the prime minister with, this plot, and the prime minister was like, no, I'm not going to just do this. So then he ends up making a inside job suicide bombing on the prime minister's daughters to make it look like a Hezbollah element did it, in order to get him to authorize the operation.
Very critical that was. I almost forgotten about that little detail there, and that's very critical because that is. It's very easy to portray the Israelis in this light as, just taking an arbitrary decision to take out an enemy, but there was some emotional tug strings that facilitated this. I think it was the prime minister had originally, whoever it was, the guy whose kids were killed, had originally said no, like Chasley said,
and had also originally lost his wife too, so now he has nothing left.
Right. So there were some heavy emotional heartstrings there that this guy, the defense minister, was able to use and take advantage of this guy. And I want to say it was the prime minister, right? Am I getting this right?
It was the prime minister.
Okay, yeah. And it, that was some gritty reading right there. I also, towards the end, after the missiles were launched, I I thought we were going to have a nuclear war, man. How they move those standard missiles and the anti-ballistic missile batteries and saving the day. Um, I would just want I would have liked to know what the international response afterward would be. As far as did the president get impeached?
Yeah, they never address how, like, say, the Russians or maybe even the Chinese would react, because the Russians and the U.S. both have satellites that can detect intercontinental ballistic missile launch. So that I'm not sure if those systems still exist, or to what extent can they see sea based missiles, or is it entirely focused on static land missiles? But I feel like that is something where it's like, what the hell is happening? The Russians would be like, what the hell is going on?
When was the book set? Was it like present day, or was it kind of like back in the 90s?
No, it's present day.
They had Virginias in there, so I would say present day.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Maybe a few years ago.
I would assume that the U.S. probably still has them, but Russia definitely does, only because Russia is more of a defense-oriented power. Like they don't do power projection like the U.S. does. They just sort of sit back and wait for the attack, but they're also going to have satellites and um, something like SOSUS, but closer to home. I would assume to just keep keep themselves apprised of what's going on, especially if there was a missile launch. But I wouldn't think that they would be focused anywhere but the ballistic missile fields that we have out in North Dakota, because I think it would be a little hard for them to look at an entire ocean and wait for a trident to break the surface.
Yeah, that is a good point, but also another good point is the fact that American ballistic missile submarines are also first strike weapons, because their weapons are very accurate. So I feel like you'd want to have a system where you could potentially see that, even though reaction times with that are a lot lower because they don't have to go as far. But I'm not sure. I'm not familiar with the intricacies of that, but I feel like someone would notice if ballistic missiles were launched. Especially since Ben, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I'm pretty sure these missiles were launched like just east of like the South China Sea or something, like that area of the Pacific.
See, now that's weird. That's what you're. It's funny that you say that. I'm thinking somewhere near the Aleutians, dude.
The Aleutians.
The Aleutian Islands up by Alaska.
Oh, really? Okay, I was thinking more close to like Taiwan or Philippines or something like that.
Wow. Well, okay. Let me ask you this: how did you come to that conclusion?
I came to that conclusion because I went on Google Maps. I found the maximum range of a Trident missile from an Ohio, and I drew out a circle basically from Iran. And just based on where Hawaii is and where this is, I thought that seemed like a reasonable launch location. They don't really describe like where like the picket lines were, where the lines of ships were and the P3s were. Did they really describe that? I
No,
don't remember.
no,
No.
no.
See, but I thought that's where it's launched from. But then also in my mind, I have like visions of like the Indian Ocean as well, like because they talk about how the the SM-3 equipped Burke or Tycon is like it was in like the Persian Gulf or something, or in like the Middle East.
Well, actually, I would probably say somewhere near a busy shipping lane, because it would be easier for the Ohio after launching the missiles to be lost in the noise. So if
Well,
the
wait a minute.
U.S. or go
Wait a
ahead.
minute. When they launch, remember when they launched the missiles? There was a boat above, and I thought it was like a Japanese boat.
Oh yeah, it was like, yeah. So that it was a Japanese fishing trawler. That's right.
So it would have to be somewhere in the Asian Pacific, I would imagine. So that's why I figured, over by the Aleutians, but I guess that's too far north. But I'm thinking somewhere out there. It's really hard to. That's why I'm really. It's funny to me that you're thinking over where you are, because it's like two people who read the book come up with completely two different points in geography.
See,
But I got Google Maps up now. I'm gonna plot a range thing and see what we got.
I would think that they would actually launch them from like the Adriatic or somewhere in the Mediterranean, only to decrease the flight time and and the time of a response from Iran.
Well, this Ohio was deployed from Hawaii, right, Ben?
Right.
That's where it got its orders.
Yeah,
It
I
was
thought it
coming
was.
out of
I thought it
Hawaii.
was Ohio out of Bangor. I mean, out of
Yeah.
Bangor, Washington,
It
right?
was originally at Bangor, but I think they were in Hawaii for the exercises they were doing in the first part of the
Right.
book.
I just know it was a Pacific-based sub. That's all I'm saying.
Okay.
And I'm just
Yeah, 'cause
I'm looking at the time of transit. They only transited for what, 5 days? Right?
yeah, that would put them somewhere near the Philippines.
Something like that, I think.
But
Five.
yeah,
Yeah,
because
it's
isn't
5 days remaining. It is right here on
yeah,
page 226. 5 days remaining. Right?
yeah,
6 days. Wait, no. Well, 6 days. Okay, it had to be 6 days because here they are still in Pearl. Way the hell out of Pearl.
yeah, isn't the Mediterranean technically Kings Bay's territory for sub deployment?
Another point, though, we had a helicopter came from Australia to the Collins to get Wilson on that boat. So it must have been south of Indonesia, like northwest of Australia, down in the Indian Ocean there.
Okay.
Oh, like the Coral Sea area?
Yeah. Yep. Somewhere around there.
Near south of Indonesia, yeah, north of Australia.
Bella La Cava, Baba Black Sheep area, Guadalcanal.
So I'm thinking it was from the Indian Ocean. Then I'm thinking.
Yep. Was there ever any coordinates that were like specifically laid out in the book, or was it just
No.
launched?
No,
No
I'm thinking
coordinates.
it's around here. Let me try and put this on my stream recording. All right, so I now have a map of this up where I'm looking at this. Since we're assuming that the sub was coming from Hawaii, was it off like San Diego when those exercises were happening? Was that where those exercises were in the beginning?
Was it RIMPAC or
Really
was it
taxing
just
my
something
memory.
else?
No, it was like they were trying to do quals for like officers looking to become captains. It was like their last test.
They'd probably do that close to Hawaii, probably somewhere north of there.
Yeah, so I'm thinking they got deployed from Hawaii, and they don't really talk about where they transited from. But looking at this, it looks like they probably would come down this way here, like south of Papua New Guinea, north of Australia here, through like what looks like the Coral Sea and the Arafura Sea and the Timor Sea.
I guess it had to be somewhere near Australia if the Collins was involved with it.
And they got him out to that boat on a helicopter or whatever.
Man, that's a non-subtle Red October reference.
Yeah.
Hey, that's another thing about this book. It had some Red October, and it had some Crimson Tide in it also.
Yeah, a little bit, but not as crazy.
Not as crazy, but a little. He touched. He didn't go full on mutiny, but he getting close.
So, well,
We're thinking about it.
That kind of touches on a larger point, especially with not only just techno thrower books, but techno thrower books dealing with a navy. I mean, it's kind of hard to escape that Clancyism about it because he was the first, and in my opinion, he probably was the best. So anything you do kind of has to either make reference to it or you tread on the same subjects that he did. And
that's what I tried to tell Chasley in the beginning: is not to put Clancy and Red October and all that out of your mind. Let this book stand on its own and try not to compare it. And it's hard, but it's doable.
Yeah, but another vein I'd like to touch on that with respect to ideas that Clancy also has. With regards to how you get someone out to a deployed submarine, there's only like a few ways to do it, if not one, and that's like a helicopter or something. So when you start talking about like real life like this, I think you get to a situation where things are only possible in a certain number of ways.
And the fact that he was the first one to put it on print makes him the owner of that idea, which probably.
And to be fair, that only happened in the movie. Jack Ryan did not get helicoptered to the Dallas in the book.
Yeah, he went to the Invincible, didn't he?
Yeah, he got ferried from I guess the Enterprise to the Invincible and a Harrier,
In
and
a Harrier, yeah.
then he was on like a DSRV ship when they started commencing the getting the Russians off the Typhoon there.
So was he? I want to say he was on the Red October in the book, wasn't he?
Yes, he was on the Red October, but never on the Dallas.
Okay, so he wouldn't have met Bart Mancuso until after the events.
Bart Mancuso came onto the Typhoon, but I think that happened. I don't think that happened until when they were trying to hide the Typhoon in like North Carolina somewhere. It's been a while since I read the book.
And circling back to what we were talking about earlier with missile detection, the book Red October brings up a good point. They hid the submarine in a place that the Russians weren't looking for it, because the Russians, in order to discern, American deployment patterns for submarines, had to look very closely at places like Norfolk and Kings Bay and what's the other one, Mayport. So a ballistic missile detection network probably would be doing the same things, but only in land-based silos. So you'd be seeing, satellites looking at places like North Dakota and I think Montana as well. But I don't think, well, I don't know how to phrase this. The Russian ballistic missile submarines always had a very concrete doctrine. It was go to the Arctic, sit under the ice shelf, and wait in case war broke out. I think the U.S. ballistic missile deployment doctrine was a little more flexible than that. So, I mean, that adds another level of complexity to how to track a ballistic missile submarine and see or figure out if they're going to launch a missile.
For sure. I would also like to bring up my recent personal experience about detecting ballistic missile launches. So Wallops Island is a NASA facility in Peninsular Virginia where they launch rockets from. And I'm all the way up here north in DC, and when they launch a rocket, I can see the exhaust plume with the naked eye. It's the brightest object in the sky. And that's a little rocket that's supplying supplies to the ISS. Ballistic missiles are fast and heavy, and they are solid rocket boosters. So I imagine that a satellite just looking at an area would be able to pick up the brightness of a ballistic missile arcing through the sky.
Actually, I don't think they launch from. The only thing I know they launch from is Vandenberg and Kennedy. So I think the stuff you're seeing is not even an actual orbit-capable rocket. It's more like sounding rockets.
It's orbital ATK launching supplies to the space station.
Oh, they've started doing that? Never mind. Ignore me.
It was their first launch after their rocket blew up 2 years ago. And yeah, that's just a little rocket trying to get some supplies to low Earth orbit in the most fuel-efficient manner. Whereas like a solid rocket booster on a ballistic missile is like, just get it there as soon as possible. This heavy-ass load of uranium and shit on the top, plutonium. So I'm also messing around with this map some more, Ben. So around the Aleutians would not be close enough to cover all of Iran, but if they were to go further north of Alaska there, they could launch and hit Iran, but it would go over Russia, right over the western part of Russia, which is the most heavily populated part. So in that case, someone I think would have to detect something if that were the case. But even then, if not, even if launched from down there, it's still something that's, what do they say, it went 700 miles up or something like that?
Well, yeah. Well, I don't know. I guess I was misunderstood that these missiles had range that they could hit anywhere on any point in the map. I guess that's just Russia, though. I'm thinking of that they can hit Russia on any point in the map. They didn't know. That's why these zones were so free that they could be anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Because I would think it would be if you're going to do it the way you're doing, it'd be pretty easy to figure out where they are. Just start lining shit up. They start checking here, start checking there.
Yeah, at a certain point.
Like a needle. I know it's a needle in the haystack still type thing, but it still gives you a place to start looking and start throwing your assets.
For sure.
I don't know how far Russia could get their assets down to near Australia, but
at a certain point, it's hard to keep things secret because physics apply for everyone.
Yeah. Well, did the U.S. let anybody know that they had what essentially equated to a rogue submarine, or was it?
So how they framed it was they said the Chinese had made a direct copy of an Ohio and that they were to sink this sub. That's how they framed it to all their ASW assets.
gave you a really horrible feeling that I'm going to have to sit here and read a blue on blue, and I really wasn't looking forward to that. And when the Collins got hit and sunk, I'm glad they made that as they dressed that up as easy as they could.
Yeah, and that was like the beginning of where Murray thought something was really up. He's like, why is the Collins coming after me? Why am I being shot by a Collins? Because so the way they framed the orders to the Kentuckys, they said Iran blew up a nuclear bomb in Washington and killed like hundreds of thousands of people. So that's how they told them that they need to retaliate against Iran. And
Okay. So
so
the submarine was willing in the launch of the missile to a point.
they
It
went through
wasn't.
and launched a few missiles at first, actually, but we'll be getting to that eventually, I believe. But when they went around for their second go through to launch some more, there was a little confrontation in between. The first encounter where they had with this Collins, well, first a P3 tried to sink them, and then a Collins tried to sink them. So they were like, "What is going on?" So like the captain started going like, "Something isn't really making sense here," but he was still going through with it because they didn't have counter orders yet.
Yeah, or a way to verify that the orders were legitimate other than the code book that they'd been given.
Yeah, and the way the radio was sabotaged is they also included a bunch of prefabricated like status update messages that the boat would expect to get, and so those would come through and they would think everything is still working, is functioning, and when they would try to, but they, so how did the I guess once they get orders to launch, the boat maintains radio silence. It doesn't communicate back with base anymore. Is that right, Ben? Because they didn't try
Right.
to talk back to anyone, so they
Right.
wouldn't have. At the end, when they finally try and make contact with their base, they get no response, and that's when they figure out something is up.
Yeah, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't remember the exact name of it, but it's a Starshine transmission, and it's basically it's a one-way directional transmission that the submarine receives, and then they go through the authentication process, and if it's legitimate, then they go and do it without talking to anybody else. They don't even acknowledge the fact that they got it. And that's the same way with pretty much any order, rather than launching a missile. If you get orders to a new patrol area, you just go and do it. You don't respond back, because then that opens up the possibility for you to be counter detected.
For sure. All right, so that was a fun tangent. I have another. Okay, so I have my first question actually about the book now. So a big hole that I kind of saw, and I'm not sure if it's a hole or not. We can figure that out. But they never really adequately described how the suicide bomber part worked, because we find out later in the book that was an inside job by the Mossad. But right before the suicide bombing happens, it takes we see the perspective of the bomber in this segment. So I'm going to read a passage from that. I had not previously marked it, so let me find it. Here we go. So this is when the suicide bomber is going to kill.
Give me a page, please.
Okay, page 54. This is when the suicide bomber is going to kill the prime minister's two daughters, and this paragraph is the third paragraph down, and it says, Abdullah turned away from the two girls. They were Jews after all, and therefore their beauty should hold no appeal. So I had kept this tucked in the back of my head about this suicide bomber's motives, and then when I later learned that it was I think they had said that a Mossad agent was the one who actually did the bombing. That part didn't line up for me, because we saw it from his perspective, and it's like, why would he give himself fake thoughts to do this mission? I don't know. Was it actually a Mossad inside person that did it, or did they just recruit someone to do it?
I would assume they would have influenced someone outside of Mossad, so like someone from Hezbollah or a Palestinian dissident to go and do it, because they have more hatred, I guess, towards Jews, and they would be more apt to carrying out such an attack, rather than having someone from Mossad go do it who might have second thoughts about it and not carry out with it.
I wish I would have read this passage again. I wish I could add more because this is so early back in the book. I had almost forgotten this whole deal. And what was your original question? If you weren't sure that this was set up by the Mossad?
So I'm trying to find the passage real quickly where the head of like operation or this this is the guy that came with Christine to kill Barack, who's the one who told the prime minister that it was that the report he had gotten about it was different than the one that was published at the Mossad or whatever. And I think he was saying it was like a Mossad inside job that this suicide bombing happened. I'm trying to figure out where that is.
I went back a couple pages here to try to refresh myself here.
Here, I found it.
What page?
560.
560?
Yes. So that was Joey. Thanks for coming, Joey.
Yeah, thanks for the ad, Joe.
For example, she continued, you and I can sit here and discuss the death of Levi's daughters and how you were responsible for recruiting the suicide bomber who killed them. Oh, sorry, this is when she's confronting Barack Hogan. This is the okay. So this is too far ahead.
Still a good part though, folks.
Very
page
good.
560. This is where I was just like, dang, go Christine, go.
Is there not a table of contents that lists like all the chapter headers?
Probably not.
Yeah, but that was the way I had read. So this is what I remember. The way I had read the meeting between this operations guy and the prime minister was that it sounded like he said that a Mossad agent did the suicide bombing. So I was conflicted with that earlier passage where the guy was having this internal thought dialogue that you would only put that there if you were trying to, like, it doesn't line up. It would be different if they talked about him in the third person, but it was saying it from his own thoughts, kind of.
Well, again, and this speaks to what I was saying earlier, and I think this is under the heading of cons. We're going, I guess we're at pros and cons, and you're talking about things, holes or something. This was a hole for you. This is where maybe, and I'm sensing this from you, where early in the book wasn't exactly as laid out as good as it should have been.
Yeah, I thought the geopolitical aspects at the beginning of the book could have had more. And I've talked about this with Ben, where you get spoiled from Clancy that he does such a great job of setting up stories. And I thought that the front matter was almost rushed because he wanted to get into the rest of it, or that he thought his readers might want to get into the rest of it, or that maybe an editor thought that. But I wanted more out of the beginning. I wanted more behind who Kogan was. We didn't learn that much about him. I wanted more about how this plan came to be. Maybe people at a ground level who were involved with this plan, like coming up with this plan. I wanted more backstory and context. But the submarine parts were good enough by themselves that I enjoyed those thoroughly.
By the time you get to the submarine, let me expound on that a little further. You as you read through the book early, the sense that I kind of got was, okay, I'm comprehending what I'm reading, but I'm not sure I'm following the story.
Yeah, it almost seems like you're taking it for granted. It's not really making sense.
Right.
Yeah. You're kind of like, okay, this is what is true, but it's like, does this really fit with my internal thought process, or does this seem to just feel right or something?
Like I said earlier here, it was only until I read on further that things that I had read previous started to make sense. And I'm not sure if that was by design or, I mean, it's like sometimes when you get in a dangerous waters mission, you're not sure of your situational awareness, and you're kind of just feeling your way around like you're in a dark room. That's how it started with me. And the more I read, the more it seemed like I became a part of the story. I was able to put it together. But and I don't know if this is just with me or you do this too, Chastity. Sometimes I get a book like this, I read it several times, and the more I read it, the more I get out of it. And notwithstanding of the book club, I think I'm going to read this book again, and I probably have even a better understanding of, especially in the beginning parts, of what happened.
Yeah, I probably will as well. This is a good flight somewhere, flight back, finish this in those two flights kind of book thing that I might do at some point. But what was I about to say? I was about to say, so it really makes you appreciate an author like Clancy, where something that you take for granted is really, when you stop and look at it after reading other works, you're like, wow, he really had a gift. He really could just lay it out and just explain everything in just the right amount of detail and not dwell on anything too much or skip over too much. But no, this was good from the perspective where you could tell where the author was in his zone, was writing the submarine and the anti-submarine warfare bits.
And as I said in the beginning, that's what originally drew me to this book, was just flipping through it. You could see that it was chock full of, stats and stuff and interesting technical, and but it's also that I think that somebody who's not into submarines, is not into ASW, that maritime minded, as I like to say, could also enjoy. Uh, Obviously, his forte is Navy, uh, and in the light of Clancy is no longer with us, no one's going to be able to replace him, obviously, but Campbell here, he makes a good effort at it. And again, like I've said throughout this presentation, worth your while. It's you get to a point where you look at it, it's almost 600 pages, and it's like, oh my god, this is going to take me forever. But I think it took me less than 2 weeks, because there was a point where you just couldn't put it down. You can't put it down. You just can't. So
there's an earlier point of yours that I just remember that I wanted to say something about. It was the when the submarine stuff at first wasn't making sense, how they weren't seeing the Ohio. I think that was done well. That was definitely on purpose. Like the very first exercise, when the LA prospective captains are going against the Ohio and they don't find him, you're like, okay, we can chalk this up to like experience gap or something, or like a 1 in a million thing where they all kind of just quote unquote suck. And then but then later on, when those Ohio's do that sweeping maneuver to try, or the LA's do the sweeping maneuver to try and find the Ohio there, and they don't see anything, that's when you're like, okay, something is up here. What is going on with this boat? But I think they set that up perfectly. And then when he reveals that their sonars have been compromised and actually like hacked, then you're like, oh my god, it all makes so much sense. I thought that little subplot that kind of keeps you like, what's going on with this? I thought that was actually a pretty good one.
What did you think? What did you think about the inside? You were talking about holes in the story and things that you question or whatever. What did you think about the play out of how the North Carolina was disabled? This is kind of right up your alley. I've been holding this one back. I didn't want to ask you that.
So it was disabled because one of the rod mechanisms failed and it dropped into the reactor, right?
Yeah.
The control rod. I thought that was fine. That was a very Clancy-esque thing for me to read through. I was like, oh, this is definitely something that would happen in a Clancy book. It's like, it's something that I'm not sure. Well, I guess you wouldn't know if it had ever happened, but it's something you would expect to not really happen. But it's like one of those things where it's like, oh, of course, it's not, it's not out of this worldly for me or anything like that. I actually thought that was good. I was like, oh no, you got to be kidding me. I enjoyed how they handled that.
I would be, with your technical expertise in the area. I know you don't work in reactors, literally, but I'm sure you know a little bit about the subject. Is that something that happens where you have drop rods like that?
Hey
guys.
Yeah.
Hello.
And by the way, no, I don't think that could ever happen. Like just especially Navy reactors, they're pretty friggin' tough.
Well, to have a rod drop and fail like that is a fail-safe thing. Like when you literally think about what fail-safe means, it's like, I want it to fail, but I want it to fail safely.
Yeah, I guess that would scram the reactor, right?
Well, just one rod would not. Ever since, well, you may have heard of this. There was an incident in Idaho where a reactor blew up and it killed 3 guys in it. It was like an Army research reactor. And the reason that blew up is because one control rod was big enough that if you took it completely out, the reactor would go supercritical. So ever since then, that, and it was already been decided before that point, no one control rod would have enough reactivity worth to make a reactor go critical if it was to be pulled completely out. So in that same vein, if you were to put one all the way in, it wouldn't be enough to fully turn off the reactor. But what happens in the book is that this one rod being all the way in ruins the flux distribution of the reactor. So you would have to, in order to get the same power output other spots of the reactor would have to run hotter than this spot, and then at that point you would get like fuel melting or something like that. So it ends up reducing the overall power of the reactor. It can still run, but I believe their speed was limited to 20 knots or something.
It was limited to standard.
Standard, okay. And then they ran it faster because they're like, you got to sink this sub, you got to get there.
Once that rod was dropped, they were done. I read that part last night. Once they tried and failed to repair that, they were done because they had to make a call to the boss and to naval reactors. And he said once they found out that rod was sitting at the bottom, that they were because they said that they couldn't effectively gauge in combat at standard, so they weren't going to allow them to even try.
Yeah, so the North Carolina is the one sub in this book. Did you read it, Rent-A-Cow?
No, I didn't.
Okay, so what happens in the book is that the Mossad intelligence agent, the Israel. So, okay, so I'm just going to simplify it down because there's a lot of backstory. The enemy here that gets the U.S. to launch ballistic missiles at Iran had a very elaborate plan that involves sabotaging American sonar so that they could not detect the tonals of this particular Ohio boat that was given the false orders to launch this ICBM. So this Virginia, the USS North Carolina, was the one boat that had not received this update yet, so they could still detect the Kentucky, which is this Ohio, and so this is an engagement that happens rather early in the book, and right before they're about to get into engage range, I believe, is when this dropped rod happens, and so that puts them out of the fight for what you think is good, but they end up coming back in later at the end and dissolving the situation.
That's right. See, I forgot all about that. Yes. I forgot all about that. See, I got to do better. Yeah, I was interested in that because that was the part of the book I was like, okay, come on. What else is going to go wrong? Really? Come on. Look, man, don't put me on the hook like this.
Yeah, I mean, I like the way they did it because it crippled the boat, but it didn't put it out of the fight. It could still, if you needed to use it, it could still potentially have the ability to do something.
Timing couldn't have been worse.
And yeah, I thought it was a very Clancy moment.
Well, you speak of Clancy, and he's always talked about, at least in his books, where no civilian, including himself, has never been in the reactor compartment. He couldn't tell you, anything about it. And in this book, they go through some detail. I'm unclassified, I'm sure, but they go through some detail on explaining the reactor compartment. In fact, they send 2 workers in there to try to repair the reactor, and I'd never gotten that from any other book. That one area of a submarine that's taboo, they don't really talk about. You've never seen pictures of it anywhere beyond that tunnel entrance.
Yeah, the little pass through.
Yeah, no one literally knows what that past that door or that hatch looks like. So to get some insight, because I'm always intrigued with the nuclear, especially with my past background. I'm always interested in in places like that where people don't get to see all the time.
And it's especially interesting because usually a lot of stories like to focus on entering Russian reactor compartments, but this is the first time, book or movie, that I've ever heard someone talk about entering an American reactor department while underway. So right. I thought that was very cool from the get-go.
Right. And you want to get to a more obvious aspect of the book, the dropped wrench I saw coming miles away.
Oh no, that's so cliche though.
It is.
That's how they got detected, huh?
Yeah.
Every time.
They got detected, but they thought it was a sonar buoy with a chain banging against it because the Virginia was all stop in the water. So they drove right by it and didn't hear it, but they were like, what was that noise? Or was it no, they thought the chain was the Virginia muzzle door opening because it sounded a lot different than the LA muzzle doors opening. But then they heard this wrench bang again, and that kind of reinforced their thought that it was like some navigation buoy or something like that. Did I say sonar buoy? I meant like one of those navigation buoys.
Right. And then again, that's an aspect of dangerous waters. I mean, that the game does a lot, but we don't see that aspect of it where sound transients like that really make a difference.
Yeah, like a lot more uncertainty in how the world sounds. Because they have a few like bagged sounds that ships can make, but it doesn't have the level of like uniqueness that you're going to see in like the real world or something, or a lot more like environmental sounds.
Yeah, I found that aspect of I was very, yeah, I love that stuff like that. I love, talking about drop wrenches, and we're also talking about uh when they were sounding general quarters that he did it silently because
Yeah.
they I wish that level of sound was transmitted through the game. Like we were talking a couple days ago about the hull popping in the game is not modeled. I thought it was all this time.
Yeah, it's just something you hear on your own boat.
Right. I thought that was something that could be heard where I got that impression, but I wish it was. I wish, even though, you really don't get that close. But anyway, Chaz, I don't know how long you want to go with it. How long we been going?
We've been going for like I want to say at least an hour. My recording says an hour and a half, but a lot of that was like before we started, like a good
Your
10 or 15
announcement on
minutes.
YouTube. Your announcement on YouTube was about an hour ago.
Yeah, we didn't start until about 12:20, I think. So it's been about an hour and 10 minutes.
Okay.
We can go through a few more passages here. I have one that I liked. It's on page 358 here. It's in the end of the second paragraph here. So this is talking about Tom Wilson. I think this is when they had to inspect the missile hatches after they got hit by the torpedo from the P3.
Oh yeah.
So as Tom stood on the submarine's deck, he felt as if he were balancing on a fulcrum, admiring God's work and awe-inspiring creation. Let me back up. The only light came from the clear night sky, which was illuminated by densely packed stars shining more brightly than he had ever seen. As he stood on the submarine's deck, he felt as if he were balancing on a fulcrum, admiring God's work and awe-inspiring creation while standing on the fruit of mankind's labor, capable of unimaginable destruction. And I thought that was I like that passage where it talked about, like the heavens and the stars and everything like that, all the beauty, and then like what all man has accomplished down here is to make a machine that's very good at killing other human beings, basically.
I found that whole, and again, here's where you're reminding me of a part that had kind of faded. That whole part where they had to go make the repairs to the sub, and the junior officer or the junior man fell down, and was almost swept away.
Yes.
And when they talk about that, if you get swept aboard on a submarine, you're pretty much lost, man.
Especially in that situation, in the pitch black in the middle of the night, in the middle of the ocean.
And that just made me think, I sit and watch Deadliest Catch all the time, and I fear for those guys, and I think that would be one of my worst nightmares is being swept out to sea, and watching the boat. What are you gonna do?
For sure. And especially in this situation where it's pitch black out and the boat itself is black and dark, and you're basically not going to see anything, and you're just going to eventually succumb.
And they were talking about, it's not even so much of drowning that the boat, you get beat up by the boat, the current of the boat.
Oh, for sure. I mean, imagine being carried by like a 5-mile-an-hour wave and just being slammed against a hard steel submarine. Like, that would hurt a lot. It's one of those things where you have to stop and be like, oh, wait, I'm being slammed against a several 1,000-ton solid piece of steel here. I'm just like, the ocean is just like whatever to me, the immense power of the ocean.
And for somebody who's actually sat in a missiles commander chair, this passage really struck me. Page 449, it's really small. And this was, you asked for 3 minimum. This was my third one. Lights on the launch control panel steadied. Sensation of the trigger in his hand reminded Tom the crew was at battle stations, missile, and the next action was his. Tom made his decision. And when I read that, I was almost afraid to turn the page. I swear to God.
He did a very good job of conveying the tension of actually having to launch nuclear weapons in this book, and I was just in these parts of the book, I was like, I couldn't stop reading, but I was like, what am I reading? Like, I felt like I was like there, a part of it. Like, oh my god, we're freaking launching nuclear missiles.
Yeah, and for somebody like I said who's been in a launch control center, real live one, SAC, seeing them lights blinking and seeing that red box with the keys in it, it it gives you a respect that these young trained individuals can go out there, and to them, if you ask every single one of them, they're doing their job. But what that job entails
Yeah,
is
the book did a very good job of being like, okay, yes, this is your job, but when it comes down to it, can you actually do it? And I think the answer is generally yes, but the book brought up a good point where it's like we were sailing for 5 days. It gave people a lot of time to dwell about it. Like if something immediate had just happened and we just got like these orders in, all of a sudden people would be fired up, ready to do it. But when you have more time to think about it, doubt starts to creep in.
and that's where I meant that the Crimson Tide aspect creeped in, because I guess there was a bit of a mutiny, right? The original weapons officer wouldn't do it, right?
Yeah, that's a mutiny. It was a one-man mutiny, but
It was
he
a one-man
refused to
mutiny
follow
on the boat,
orders.
and he did not want to follow orders. And there was some precursor to that. I mean, there were, and Chasley hit it right on the head. That after 5 days of thinking about it, um, there was a lot of hesitation with the crew, even though in their minds Washington had been, our nation's capital had been destroyed by terrorists. But there was still hesitation with some of these guys that have been, probably training for years to do this. This is what you're here for. That's what they're out there for. Uh, is deterrence. That's what it's supposed to be. But in an event like this, you are the retaliatory strike arm. You are probably with those SLBMs. You probably are for a strike.
Yes. And I just wanted to say, I think earlier I referenced the captain as being Murray when his name is Malone.
Yeah, I think you got that right. No,
So another scene in this whole nuclear missile launching sequence was when Malone confronted the weapons officer, and I was very close to thinking he was going to shoot him right there on the spot. I was like, Jesus Christ.
Damn it, Weps!
But when I saw that, I was like, oh no, come on, Malone's a good guy. It was he did a very good job of articulating that kind of sequence in a way that I think only someone who had been on a ballistic missile submarine as he had could have.
That was very gripping, because in my mind, I'm reading the book, but it's playing out in the Hunt for Red October scenes. So all that was played, all that was played out in my mind in the scenes of Red October, and um, it was. That's probably when I couldn't. That is probably the area of the book where I just couldn't put it down. And you were all, like I said, I was afraid to turn the page, and I think we were online that night. Remember, because I said, mark this page, because when you get here, you're going to be like, what the hell is he doing? And yes, I know he's not Clancy, but I do give him credit for this up the way he did, and be able to land it, be able to give it a good landing, a plausible good landing, where at the point where it didn't feel rushed, it didn't feel like he was just tying up loose ends.
No, it was good and very original. I really enjoyed the plot, how it ended up working out in the end.
And when dovetailing off my passage here, when I did turn the page, and all of a sudden they're talking about a Japanese fisherman on a boat seeing this missile launch.
Yeah.
Describing it. I almost wanted to just stop reading the book, because I figured, oh, this is not what I expected.
Yeah, it's really not how you think it's going to happen. You're like, oh my god, they actually launched missiles.
Yes. I think this is my biggest takeaway of this book, is I never thought they were going to, I mean, somebody who's seen a nuclear weapon in my life, I didn't think they were actually going to release them. It's almost like a taboo. You don't really see that in too many books. People like to write about. You don't really see too many game simulators that simulate nuclear weapons because they don't want to try to glorify it and make it fun. It is the ultimate end. Somebody who's been kind of had training in it and very unnerving, just to see it happen like that. But all's well that ends well. The world still survives, and good guys at the end.
That was also a miraculous sequence with the whatever that land-based anti-ballistic missile system was called, and then with the Arleigh Burke or whichever it was shooting at the ballistic missiles. That was also a very intense sequence there. But I guess once they start, I wasn't sure how that was going to end. I was like, are they going to let a missile hit Iran? I don't know.
That's what I'm saying. Once you release it, it's like, okay, once you release it, it's not coming back. So you're going to have to find a clean, quick way of disposing of this without killing millions of people, right? Hopefully.
Yeah.
I think you would have had to write another book, had a couple books. I don't know how that works out like that. If you end up bombing Russia or bombing Iran, there's going to be some retaliatory.
I feel like at that point it would almost lose its scope, though, because this was a very submarine-centric book. And I feel like the fallout of that would not have been very submarine-centric.
There also is some geopolitical stuff in here, obviously, but with our government, how our government would respond to something like this, and how a president basically, through his legacy, was risked his legacy and probably impeachment, maybe jail time. Who knows? To get this, once he found out what was going on, to try to rectify an end to this. You remember all that, Chasley?
Kind of. They decided to keep it under wraps.
Yeah.
I'm assuming there's more detail that I'm missing that you may have remembered better.
Kind of, sort of. They were keeping it under wraps, and they made decisions to kill Americans, basically, when they went after the submarine.
Yes. Okay, yeah.
How that would have been handled, that would, very interesting to see how that would play out, and on it a little bit. But the interaction between the chief of staff, the president, and Christine, you could have just centered it right there on that, and just left out the submarine points, and it would have been pretty interesting, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it was still a pretty good thriller at that point, yeah, too.
And that's what I meant earlier. There's several aspects of this book, that he had little fires in here and there and everywhere. There was Christine, there play out with the Israelis. There was a play out with our government, and the submarine, So like I said, there's a lot to keep you. I think maybe that's why it's hard to pick up in the beginning, because there's just so damn much to put together here.
Yeah. I'm trying to find where the North Carolina has their final interaction with the Kentucky there, to figure when he authenticates that he's real and not just like a recording or something.
What the captain just up and said, you know what? Let's just stop and see what's going on here. That's what happened, right? He was going to launch and then said no, right? They were going to launch more of their missiles, right?
Yeah, they were going to launch more, and then the North Carolina found them. And then the North Carolina gave a very canned response, like, this is USS North Carolina, USS Kentucky, seize your thing. Exo was like, it's a ploy, right? And then the North Carolina captain, let's see.
527?
Oh, further ahead than that.
Further ahead? 5.
It's actually a few page long sequence. Yeah, there's more build up than I remember.
535. It's going back and see right here towards the end. It starts to pick up fast. You go from the Kentucky, Carolina,
the North Carolina is like request to speak to Commander. Brad Malone's like request to speak to Commander Gallagher, and it's like, Kentucky, this is North Carolina. If you're Commander Malone, you have 1 minute. Oh wait, the North Carolina was approached. Okay, oh no. So at this point, the Kentucky had already decided to not fire, and I think the North Carolina was about to sink their ass. But the Kentucky was like, no, we've come around. Like, let me convince you. And then, so this is Commander Malone talking to Commander Gallagher over the Gertrude or whatever they call it now. Dennis, do you really want me to tell everyone what you have tattooed on your ass? And I thought that was just a great end to the tension there. I had a very, very good laugh at that one when I read that. That's on page 541.
I'm right there because I'm kind of reading on from that, and I remember the wave of sensation and the feeling that I had just completed a frickin' marathon when I read um, make preparations to come to Periscope Depth. We need to have a chat with ComSub Pack. So
Yeah, because
thank God.
right before the Carolina rolls up, you're like, okay, they just came around, everything's good, but now the North Carolina comes in, it's like, oh, we found them, let's sink them. We're like, no. I think that may be a good place to conclude this meeting. What do you say?
Well, like I said, a good book. If we've tantalized your interest, if you haven't read the book and we've tantalized your interest, still get it. Hopefully you'll get an enjoyment out of it. And for those of you who did read it, hopefully you got as much out of it as we did.
Yes, while we did spoil some, there's still a lot left that we did not talk about in this book, and it would still be worth to read it at this point to get the actual tension of the moment, because it's so thick you could cut it with a knife, as it were, in many places in this book.
It's when you have it in your hand, it seems like something that's going to take forever, but then when you get done reading it, it's just like, wow, that didn't take long at all. And you'll have a just finished marathon feeling, and you might even have lost some weight for not eating.
If you're not a big book reader, this was not a particularly long book in my opinion. I've read much longer books, but it was a good one. Good first book, and I'd say I would give it 1.5 thumbs up. Right on 2 thumbs up though. Just the beginning part, I wanted a little more out of that, but the rest of the book was very good.
I'll probably give it 1 3/4 thumbs up. Again, the glaring aspect for me was the violation of the no loan zones. That just doesn't happen, and that is pretty much the linchpin of the book. Without that sequence of disabling the radios, the story would have not been able to happen. And I mean, and just from my technical aspect, being in these situations, there are things that they call no loan zones, and that is exactly why, is because you not permit you to sabotage critical components of our nation's priority A resources. So there are steps to prevent that. And he does go in the book in the back and talk about, people who are in the know are going to say, hey, that's not right. So he does address it. And obviously to make the book, plausible, there's going to be some Hollywood in it, but those of us who have been in those situations, I'm sure Chasley, you probably have them in your work too. There's just not a situation where you're going to be in alone in an area to be able to do that. You never can take the human element out of it.
We don't have that per se. I guess we have it in the sense that when we make engineering reports, we have to have someone else verify. So that's an analogous thread to your no loan zone. Like one person by themselves could not make a calculation for one of our packages or something. So it's on the same vein of the no loan zone.
When I read that passage where, hey, go get a cup of coffee, and
yeah, right.
No, that's not. But other than that, that's pretty much the only hole that I could find. You want to talk about holes, but that's the only plot hole I could find. Glaring.
Well, first, let me say, despite what we had just said, I definitely recommend you to get the Trident Deception. Very good book. We actually had not touched about this in this book club meeting, but I found myself in a lot of passages when they were talking about tactics and stuff like that. I was like, wow, we kind of do stuff like this in Dangerous Waters. So that was very cool for me to experience. But yeah, this book is highly recommended by both of us. You should definitely pick it up. It's not a long book.
I want to say, if you watch Chasley with any regularity and you're a subscriber to his channel, this is a book for you.
For sure. You are going to like this book. There's no way you're not going to like this book.
Yeah, if you're here, you're already interested in the book. So it's not a point of being interested. It's, if you're here, if you're watching Chasley, if you're a member of our or his group here, then book is for you.
For sure. Okay, so thank you, everyone. So for next month, our book will be The Silent War by John Pena Craven. If you've seen any submarine documentaries, you may have seen him in some of these documentaries. He played a big part in developing technology for the submarine community in the Cold War. So this should be a very good read. This will be a nonfiction one, and tentatively, our book club meeting will be November 27th, which is the last Sunday of the month, because I am out of town from the 20th through the 26th. But yeah, so thanks for watching, everyone. Hope you enjoyed the book club. Hope you enjoyed the book, and we'll see you guys later. And as always, good hunting.